slightly different location. I am actually cat sitting right now. Trace? Trace! Trace, get in here. Trace! I'm right here. No one else is in the house right now. That's why I'm here. Could you not walk on my computer? Like me. Woo! Trace, no. Yeah, that's all about you, dude. Really? First off, a little bit of an apology for some background noise of water running. That's actually a huge aquarium right behind the camera. Can't do much about that, not into animal killing. But I wanted to make a quick video on 7 of my favorite books that few people know about, or at the very least, no one seems to talk about these books at all. If you started your year off like I did with a huge to-read pile and really trying to dedicate yourself to getting a lot of books read this year, if you really want to break out of certain genres and try different things, I've got a list of some pretty interesting books you might be interested in. So one of the first books I actually don't have a physical copy of right now because I actually let my dad borrow it and heaven knows where it is right now. That book is Half-World by Hiromi Goto. Hope I pronounced that correctly. But it is a fantastic book. I do believe it might have been up for some awards, I'm not sure. I certainly hope it did win a few things because it's an absolutely fantastic book. Now, when this first came out, which was quite a while ago, it might have been discussed. I wasn't really in the YouTube book sphere at the time, so I really can't say. But it needs to be talked about more. It's one of the best coming of age kind of stories that I've read. It's absolutely phenomenal. It is creepy. It's got some pretty creepy elements to it. So if scary stories really disturb you deeply, I'd say steer clear. And usually I don't like those kinds of stories typically, but this one's really, really well-grounded. The heroine has an amazing story, an amazing arc of trying to find her mother, and it is an absolutely amazing story because of it. It's very character-focused and never really gets lost in the shuffle. So amazing book, highly recommend. Another book, and this one I really don't hear anyone talking about, but it is this one. This is Skeleton Man by Joseph Bruchac. Joseph Bruchac? Is that how you pronounce it? Unsure, but this book is absolutely phenomenal. I do have some other books from this author on my to-read list. I haven't gotten around to them yet, which makes me really sad. But this book, it's very, very short. It's not very long at all. You can read it in one sitting if you're an avid reader like me. But it is absolutely phenomenal. Again, it does have creepy elements to it, which, again, I usually am not into. But this is absolutely great. I have actually purchased various copies of this book. This is yet another copy that I happen to have right now because I gift them to people because nobody seems to have heard of this book, and it's so, so good. Every single person I've had read it loves this book. So I really, really highly recommend this. This is a story about a girl who she's pretty convinced that this guy is masquerading as a human when really he's the Skeleton Man, which is a folklore, and no one believes her because she's just a kid. So it's really pretty much about her trying to outsmart and outwit this supernatural creature so she can kind of get away because he's evil. And it's got some pretty scary parts in it, but it's really, really good, well worth it. So even if you're usually adverse, you still might really like this. Again, very character-centered. It's actually pretty short too, very well done. This one is a book that I feel like a lot of people have heard of the animation by Miyazaki. Not a lot of people know that it's a book. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that didn't know that Howl's Moving Castle was a book first. Now, I will say that the book has some serious pros and cons to it. One of the cons being, I think Miyazaki actually made a great decision at one of the plot points. He actually left an entire mini arc out of the movie, which was a good decision because I feel like it actually distracted from the story and the characters. So that's one downside to this book, but what makes this, excuse me, Trace, what makes this book worth the read though, despite having that, is the fact that the sharp dialogue exchange between Sophie and Howl is pretty darn hilarious. Sophie's brain in and of itself is absolutely hilarious. She was definitely softened as a character quite a bit for Miyazaki's adaptation. So if you want a slightly snarkier, more witty variation of her, this is so great. I identify very heavily with Sophie, so yeah, I really, really recommend this. This isn't necessarily one particular book recommendation, although this one is pretty good if you would like a sampling. But this is a random reader with a bunch of short story compilations, essays by the author Virginia Woolf. Now, some people, probably quite a lot of you actually, were probably required to read one of her books in high school or college. I was, but I also had to read her essays, which are shorter, they're essays, they were written for publications. And I actually really fell in love with those first. And then I ran into her novel Orlando, and I really, really liked her as an author. She has some really interesting ideas on the craft of writing, on poetry, and also on feminism, which I feel like because of the era she was in, she had to take an extremely practical approach to. So if you're one of those people that you wish these kinds of topics were handled in a slightly more blunt and practical manner, she's very much that. She's very blunt, she's very practical, but at the same time, she is an artist, and her descriptors are very well crafted at the same time. She did unfortunately die of suicide. She had suicidal depression, which back then there was no real fix or medication for. So there's some pretty heartbreaking stuff in here. In this particular reader, there are some letters from her husband after she died, and they're pretty heartbreaking, so be well warned on that. But again, it doesn't have to be this particular reader. I think this reader is actually out of print. I don't even know what year this reader is. 1984. Yeah, pretty sure this one's out of print. But you can probably find something similar at a used bookstore or online, avebooks.com. Oldworldbooks.com is pretty good too. But yeah, I recommend a lot of her essays. Some of them are, I think, open to the public as well. Definitely check them out. But yeah, a lot of things by this author are actually really fantastic. I really recommend them. So this one I'm pretty sure you guys don't know about unless you're an extreme nerd like me. And by extreme nerd, I mean you were gaming on PCs back when they were first commercially available and somewhat reasonably priced, which would be in the late 90s. And you played a little game known as Myst. Now, Myst was one of its kind at the time. It came out in the late 90s. Might have been early 90s, actually, now that I think about it. A little blurry on the exact date, but I do remember playing the original PC game, Myst, on old Windows 95, and oh man, it taxed our computer something fierce. What was so great about that game and what was so revolutionary was it was not based on combat, which at the time most games had either combat or platforming of some kind, and this one really didn't. The entire point of the game was to discover these worlds, to investigate them, and to puzzle solve along the way, and you picked up more of the story as you did that. And so the entire point was to unravel the entire story throughout the entire game. So it really was kind of the first of its kind that did that and focused so heavily on its graphics and its storyline, which really just dropped you in the middle of this giant epic almost, but at the tail end of it, when something bad has happened and theoretically people who are bad were caged or imprisoned, and you're just kind of dropped there trying to figure out who got imprisoned, why they were imprisoned, and whether or not they were imprisoned correctly. It's really interesting because the story was clearly already written before the game was crafted. So the game creators did a fantastic thing. They had a pre-built world, they drop you in the middle of it, and discover the story as you go. Enter the books. Years later, the creators of the game paired up with some other authors, and they came out with a trilogy of books that predate the games, that catch you up to where the games happen. And this is an expansive world with a lot of culture that's built into it as well, and it's one of the best world-building books I've read outside of classics like Tolkien, which sometimes I think sometimes Tolkien went too far. I don't need to know about the moss on every single rock. I mean, I get it, we're in a forest. We can move on now. It's really cool to see how worlds collide, how a regular human ends up discovering this world where linking books will be created, these books that people write and they link to other worlds. What's really interesting is that the people that create this art don't even know fully what this art means. So they don't know if they're creating the world itself or if the world already exists and they're just linking to it, hence linking books. And who believes what is super, super important, because those who believe they're creating the worlds believe they have the right to the worlds, that they're gods of the world and they can do whatever they want to the world and its inhabitants, because they have a right to it. Those who don't believe, those who believe that they're just making a link to a world that predates them, they of course don't believe they have any right to the world. They have no right to interfere with its people. So those two different thoughts are really critical, and which characters believe what is really critical to motivations. Are you? You're not gonna just... Really? This is Foundling by D.M. Cornish, and these books took, I believe, a decade or so to create. It's a trilogy, absolutely phenomenal. Again, it's one of those books that most people who I lent it to love it. It's really, really good. It's a dark steampunk, I would say, but heavy on dark and very old school steampunky vibes. So there are some ships and things like that, but there are no airships, at least not to my memory. Everything stays pretty, I would say, grounded in reality. It's steam power that actually somewhat makes more sense. It's not as fantastical as some of the steampunk we see nowadays, or some of the steampunk that would be under the sci-fi sector. This is not that kind. This is a fantasy realm with monsters, and they use a lot of steam-powered things because that is literally the only power source they have access to. And yeah, it's all about this kid, an orphan, who he gets accepted to be a lamplighter as a job, and so he has no one to take care of him, so it's like, I gotta take this job. It is pretty dangerous. He has to get training. It's almost a militarized job because the lampposts that are lit around roads and other such things, they keep monsters away. And if the lights aren't tended to properly, or you're not super on your guard as a lamplighter, you will be eaten. So that's where the dark part comes in. This is really, really good, and I enjoy the fact that all of the characters had different motivations. It was very, excuse you. Anyway, so everyone has their own motivations. You don't always find them out right away. There's some really amazing characters, and yeah, the world building, once again, in this book, absolutely phenomenal. One of the better world building books I've read in a really long time. This is one of my favorite short story compilation books. This is by Francesca Leah Block, and it is The Rose and the Beast. And these are loosely based on fairy tales, many of them Grimm's fairy tales, and they've been twisted in some way or modernized. I liked the fact that these were never really twisted in ways I easily expected or saw coming. Everything was very different, and although a few of them are dark, not all of them are. Some of them are just kind of interesting and weird. This was one of those things, I believe I got this at a library sale. Yes, I did. This used to belong to a public library. I love library sales. Some of my best books come from library sales. These stories are pretty short. You can read a lot of them in one sitting. You can probably read most of this book in one sitting, honestly. The stories are really short, and they're spaced pretty... They're spaced a little odd in the book, so there's a lot of just dead space, which a part of me kind of hates because it's a waste of paper, but another part of me kind of enjoys for the fact that it is very easy to read. It's easy on the eyes. Ew, if you're wondering about the giant bulb of sun behind me, this, I'm gonna turn that off. So those are some of my favorite books that no one seems to talk about. Again, a few of these might have been talked about when they were first released, but I never heard a peep of them. No one seems to mention them now, which is such a shame. They're some of my favorite books, and quite a few of these I have read multiple times. So if you haven't had a chance to dig into some of these, I highly recommend them. And definitely let me know if you guys have some recommendations for books for me down below, especially if they're books nobody seems to talk about, like ever, like those kinds of books where you guys discover them at a thrift shop or just, you know, in a library sale. Thank you guys so much. Bye.